What's going on, good people of the internet? It is time for OnComicsGrounds.com's flagship podcast, Panel to Panel, where a bunch of folks shoot the breeze and talk about comic books and such. We are back once again to talk about comics. That's the way we're going to phrase that, because normally we talk about comic news, geek media, everything in between. But this is, we're going to talk about comics today, because the one thing that we have been able to pursue the most recently is talking about indie comics when we can, and helping out Kickstarters that are in need, because they are a great story and a great thing to put out into the ether right now. And the one that we have here today is one that has caught me off guard, and one that I'm definitely going to support. Whether we were going to cover this or not, I probably would have found this somehow, because the story is something right up my alley when it comes to history and family. The one thing we talked about in this episode that I loved was the element of family. So, what am I talking about? Obviously, I need to get to that point. Multi-Ringo nominated writer, editor, letterer, Erica Schultz sat down with me this evening, and we had an amazing conversation about Star Wars, about her entire career, and when it comes to different books she has written or worked on, even covering a Daredevil annual that really spoke to me a couple years back when I really needed it, because dang, Charles Soule, you're a good writer, but I needed a breath during your time on Daredevil. Hopefully one time when he will listen to this podcast. But in terms of what matters right now, Erica Schultz, you have really touched me in a way that I really needed. And this interview was probably one of my favorites. And I hope that you guys will give it a listen. I hope you can support the Kickstarter for her new book coming out today, on the day of us releasing this episode. Deadliest Bouquet is going to be launching on Kickstarter today, and hopefully you can support it in any way you can, whether it be a share or a tweet or even putting some money behind it. Hopefully you will support this book, get it the traction that it needs. We will have some links below to the Kickstarter, to Erica's other work, like her time on Forgotten Home, that other book she had written for Comixology Originals, and hopefully you find some joy in this content. So hopefully you enjoy the interview, and we will be on next week with a brand new episode for you folks. Turn the page with us on this episode of Panel to Panel. Peace out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty chill about everything. So, the only thing I really get sort of like riled up about is, if we start talking like Transformers or, something like that, or like, I don't
like pre-reboot IDW Transformers, or like Transformers in general.
Like Transformers in general. Like I don't acknowledge anything after the movie.
That's fair.
I'm not like, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. Like, I was born June 1977. So like my mother, I was in the theater during the first Star Wars. I was there for A New Hope before it even said A New Hope, because remember that was the re-release. I was there, so I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I'm not a big fan of the prequels, and the
oh, you just broke my heart, because my first one was Phantom Menace. That just broke my heart.
7, 8, and 9, I'm not really a big fan of them. I think the only new thing that they did in the films that was palatable was Rogue One. I thought Solo was meh.
See, everyone hates on. I'll just record an intro separate from this, and I'll just cut it in where we started talking, because I'm really enjoying this. It's like Solo is one of those movies where I was glad, similarly to Rogue One, where it didn't feel like we needed to pull out a lightsaber, where it felt like one of the novels I had read when I was younger from the extended universe, where we were just having fun, smuggling stuff, having a good time. I loved that.
I liked Solo. I thought it was good and everything, but one thing that I really hated was, so in A New Hope, Han Solo has an incredible redemption arc.
He does.
And then, no offense to George Lucas, I mean, it is his own toys that he can continue to play with. But when he turned around and changed that to Greedo shooting first,
Oh.
that killed me because what it did from a story aspect, and it diminished his redemption arc.
Can I
That's
give
the
you a
first.
recommendation for a book that might help you fix that opinion a little bit?
Sure.
Star Wars Last Shot by Daniel Jose Older, and it came out about a year or two ago, and it came out right when Solo was coming out as like a companion piece, but it was its own thing. That half, like a third of the book, was after Episode 6 and like the aftermath novels, and a third of it's during the time where Han and Lando are younger, around the time like that Solo was about to happen or after it's already happened. And it's really interesting to see how Han is existing after Episode 6 in the new canon, and I think it might help you out a little bit.
Yeah, I'll look at it. I'll look at it. I can't. I'm kind of an old curmudgeon, so I can't guarantee that I will, but I will
Okay.
guarantee that I will look it up.
That's fair. Now, if there's anything Star Wars that I will ever pitch somebody, it's the Thrawn novels, because Timothy Zahn is the holier than thou person in all of Star Wars. Where
I thought that was Dave Filoni.
see, here's the thing. I'm the controversial one where there's a hierarchy where it's George, then Timothy Zahn, then Dave Filoni, because George chose Dave to sort of be the Dick Grayson of the team, where like he is the one that got the mantle, but Timothy Zahn is more of the Tim Drake, the one who studied fully without having to be given anything. He like because he had Thrawn in the extended universe and played in all the toolbox and everything before everything happened. Then Disney was like, "Wow, your character was so impactful back then. How would you like to bring him back into canon?" And Zahn said, "You know what? All right, cool. Well, let's start back from the beginning." And he rebuilt Thrawn in the most powerful way, extended him into the Clone Wars and back before Episode 1, and like the current stuff he's working on right now, Thrawn Ascendancy, is just nuts. And it feels like the like imperialistic spy thriller type stuff we had wanted from that Empire era. So like I remember the second novel, not treason or Thrawn alliances, where half the book is Thrawn and Vader, but the other half is Thrawn and Anakin during the Clone Wars. And the entire time during the Vader sections, Vader can't say nothing to Palpatine about him knowing Thrawn from before. Otherwise, everything's gonna bust out loose and everything's gonna go to crap. So it's so interesting to see the parallels of their relationship unfold.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're excited. That's good.
I'm sorry. It's just like you said, Star Wars is my home. So like I got real comfy real quick. I'm sorry.
I know, that's fine. I mean, like, I've always had a very soft spot for like all kinds of sci-fi, Star Wars, original Star Trek. We used to watch Flash Gordon when we were kids all the time.
Nice.
Like the old, serials on, PBS or that kind of thing. I would say Tom Baker and Peter Davison are my doctors.
That's fair.
I watched the end of John Pertwee's run and then all of Tom Baker, all of Peter Davison, and no offense to Colin Baker, but I could not stand it. Like, I was like, I'm done. But I'm going to be the first person to admit this. I'm kind of like a traditionalist. I'm kind of, curmudgeon-y that way.
Understandable.
But I've been, I'm very comfortable in my Gen X. I hate everything skin.
That's fine. I feel like because of me being born in '95, I feel like I'm stuck between two eras of like the past generation and the millennials, where everyone's hip to the new trends and whatnot. And I'm just like, you kids and your nonsense. I'm gonna just go over here and sip my Diet Coke in the corner and just read my comics. It's okay. You do you. It's fine.
Well, I mean, if you were born in 95, I was starting college in 95, so
Wow, that's awesome.
yeah. But it's funny because it's like, we've it's interesting to see how other people watch the same films.
Hmm.
And even if they watch it at the same age, it's interesting because the environment that they're in is different. Like the societal environment is different. Like 77, 78, like there was a lot of interesting shit going on. Excuse me, I'm
No,
sorry.
no, you can cuss here. It's fine.
All right, I'm
You
just
you feel at home. Feel at home.
okay, okay. It's like sometimes people are like, and that's like, all right, well,
We have been
just use
called the
the
drunk
beat.
college girl of comic podcasts, so you're right at home.
Well, as a sorority girl, I'll take that. Um, Go Delta Gamma.
Yes.
So, so I find it interesting, when I talk to people and they're like, "Oh yeah, well, I watched Star Wars when I was a kid, and this and the next thing," and then they're like, "Yeah, and I was born in, like 1992." So it's interesting that they're watching the same film, but but everything around them has changed,
Yeah.
you know, and I think that certain things in certain time periods, really, and this is kind of like the purist in me. Like, you think about Jaws, all right? 1970, I believe it was 1974 or 1975.
Yes.
So when you watch Jaws, like now you watch Jaws, you're like, that's ridiculous. I see the hinge in the in the fake shark and this, that, and the
Hmm.
next thing. But when you watch Jaws in 1981 on
It was
CB,
revolutionary.
not only was it revolutionary, it scared the living hell out of you.
Hmm.
You know, and obviously, back then you had no concept of what film could be in terms of CGI and photorealism and where we are now. But you watch it back then and you're like, holy Jesus God. But I can still go back and watch it now and it still scares the bejesus out of me.
Almost definitely. I remember recently I went back and watched some of the earlier Freddy movies, and while they don't scare me the way they did when I was a kid, there's still those few scenes where I'm like, wow, really got. I remember watching Freddy Part 5, where they're just stuffing the girl full of food and she's just dying, and I'm like, wow, I remember having nightmares of this as a child, and now I've just become immune to horror. It's very strange because I'll be sitting in theater cracking up watching people run from the killer, and back then I was petrified.
Well, I mean, that's like that 36 Chambers of Death track where they talk about from Wu Tang.
Hmm.
Where he says,
Oh, you know your Wu Tang. Oh, this is gonna be a good time. I'm in. Oh, yes.
you know what I'm referring to.
Hmm.
Just keep feeding you and feeding you and feeding
Yes,
you. That's what I was referring to.
yes. But it's still nice that you have context for certain things. It's nice.
Well, you want me to bust out Onyx too? I mean, come on.
So let's dive in a little bit because it's funny. I started doing my research Friday and like trying to get back into the flow of things, and then I forgot about what was going on because I knew Mary wasn't going to be here. That's why things happened. But um, I had looked through your bibliography, and I literally had read something of yours and never knew.
Which one?
Your Daredevil annual,
Hmm.
because it was right when I was getting back into comics, like when I started collecting again, and I was so on Soul. I was like, yo, I need to read everything Charles Soule. Like his Daredevil spoke to me in like a really big way. Like I didn't even want to watch the Netflix show. All I needed was Charles Soule. And then right before Marvel Legacy, your annual just slid into my pull box. And it was such this breath of fresh air after all the stuff that Soul had done with the crazy blood killer and everything, and like
And Purple
refixing,
Man.
yeah, and refixing Matt's identity, and then you just come in like, yo, let's talk about like an old like prequel piece about Misty and Matt and this random partner of Misty's. I'm like, yo, I love this, and it's still sitting in my long box because you gave me that refresher that not everybody knows to put in somewhere before stuff starts popping off again.
Well, I mean, when I was approached to do it, I was just asked, like, and this can happen sometimes to writers. You can kind of get typecast. So I had written a lot of crime fiction,
Mm-hmm.
and I was kind of typecast as that. So they said, oh, we kind of want to get back to basics with Misty and this, that, and the next thing. And I had pitched a Daughters of the Dragon in space, where like Misty and Colleen were basically um I mean, when you think of them as characters, they're street level characters.
Most
So
definitely.
how do you bring them out of their comfort zone? Is you put them in space. You put them in a place that they are going to feel completely uncomfortable, and that's where, you're going to get drama and humor and all kinds of stuff, kind of fish out of water.
Hmm.
So I had this idea of basically like these intergalactic bail jumpers, because in Daughters of the Dragon there was one point where they were basically getting bail jumpers,
Hmm.
and so I figured, Sword, Abigail Brand, and Sword would come
That would
and
be so cool.
um, basically say, like, look, you're the best on this planet in the galaxy. We need you to get some people, and then we could do cool little like a long, the long arc is them finding this one person, but we could do like cameos by like Norrin and Beta Ray Bill and all these cosmic characters, and just start throwing Gladiator, and start throwing cameos, and even the Shi'ar maybe.
That sounds like the pitch that we need right now, because I keep saying over and over again that it feels like no one knows who's driving the bus at Marvel right now, because you had all of the comics gators trying to cause drama while they were trying to move into the next generation, and now they're just like, we don't know what to do other than what we did for 20 years and 60 years, and it just, and then you got Jason Aaron just doing everything now, and like they're just giving him full reign like they did Bendis, and I'm just sitting over here like, can I get like a status quo for 5 minutes, please? And it's just like, so like a book like that would be a fresh take on characters that we really need right now.
Well, Marvel has my number, so.
Hey, like for real, because I've been looking at some of your work, and I was already reading some stuff. And Mary, like, no, she wasn't able to be here. She had read your Forgotten Home series, and it seems like you said, you love your intergalactic type stuff, but you also love your mysticism, and especially some stuff you have going on. I want to know, what is your origin beyond just like this, like the sci-fi part of you, like what made you want to get into comics? Because I always tell people, like creators, when they come on here, you have to give me like your issue zero, like what made you pick up your first book, so to speak.
I was a bratty little sister who would steal whatever my brother came home with.
Oh, fair
So
enough.
I used to read his comics, and I've always loved storytelling, visual storytelling, television, film, comics, things like that. When I first got out of college, I started working at an ad agency, and I was doing storyboards. I worked as a copywriter, art director, and I was doing storyboards. And I mean, yeah, it was commercials, but it was still visual storytelling.
Of course.
Um, and then after that, when everybody got laid off in 2007, 2008, I went and I got a job at an art studio, and I was doing, Photoshop art, and we were working on the Astonishing X-Men motion comic Gifted.
Oh.
So I was doing, background art for that, and and I was doing some animation for that, and I did the lip sync animation for that 6-issue series that we did. And then I stayed at the studio because originally I had come on as a freelancer for, that project, but I ended up staying for almost 8 years.
Wow.
It's like you sign on for 3 months and you stay for, 8 years. And throughout that period, I was working on all kinds of stuff. I was working on background art and inking, and color assists and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, and I knew, I always enjoyed comics. I always enjoyed storytelling. And, like a lot of writers, you sort of have notebooks and notebooks filled with story ideas, or, half written short stories. And I thought, okay, well, you know, I don't know what to do with these. Why not, you know, take a leap and try adapting to a comic? So I took the story M3 that I had, and I adapted to a comic script. And because I was working at the studio and we were working on comics, I was being exposed to what comic scripts were formatted like and such. And one of the other artists in the studio, a man by the name of Vicente Alcazar, who's worked on Moon Knight and Conan and
Mm-hmm.
Jonah Hex and, all these fantastic characters. Um, I had written a couple of scripts for M3, which was the first comic that I did, and I gave him the first script. Um, and he read it, took a couple days and read it, and he came back and he's like, I really like this. We should do this. So we ended up doing 12 issues of M3. We put it out on our own over about 4 years. But even in that time period, we had gotten commissioned as a team to work on a few projects together because we really worked well together. Um, and yeah, and that really, I really got the bug from that. And then after M3 came out, I had gotten my first job at Marvel, which was doing an original graphic novel for a TV show called Revenge, and it was
I feel like I've heard of that before.
yeah, it was a show that was on ABC for from like 2012 or 2013 until like 2015,
Okay.
and I had written the original graphic novel, which was the prequel to the first season. And it was an interesting experience because I had an editor at Marvel, but then I also was working with the producers from the TV show.
Yeah, what is that like? Because I always wonder with prequel novels, like I've seen some of the ones they do for the MCU films that they sort of tuck like prequel comics into. What is that like being given the Bible for something that you have no idea, never heard of this world before, and they're letting you tell the original story, but they're giving you sort of like the bullet points you need to hit.
It was interesting because, whenever you're working on something that's like a licensed comic,
Mm-hmm.
um, you you're playing with other people's toys, and there are rules that you have to, abide by and certain things. The other thing is that because it was ABC and Marvel, I kind of had, two bosses on it.
Yeah.
Um, and it was a bit of a balancing act because there were times that I would get contradictory edits. And, my brain's like, all right, well, technically these are ABC characters, but my paycheck is coming from Marvel, so who do I listen to, kind of thing. Um, but it is, I mean, it's an interesting exercise, and it's, I think, as pleasant or unpleasant as it is. I mean, it was a pretty neutral, all things considered, it washed out.
Of course.
But but it was a good exercise to have because if you want to work in comics professionally and you want to work in licensed work, which is basically where you're going to get paid to do it,
Yeah.
um, you're going to have to learn to make concessions. You're going to have to learn to that you are an employee, not an employee, excuse me, but you are working with someone else's stuff. Um, and unless you get to that like top tier, like you were saying, like Bendis, Aaron, DeConnick, you can't really dictate things. I teach at the Kubert School, and that's one of the things that I tell the students. When you graduate, you're at the top now of the school, but when you graduate, you're on a whole new ladder.
It's a whole other ball game.
And you gotta, you've reached the top of this mountain. Well, then you've got another mountain you gotta start at the bottom of. And that's just, I mean, that's life. Graduating high school, going to college, or
Mm-hmm.
graduating college and going to the job force. I mean, that's literally life is just sort of a continuous stream of mountains that you have to climb. And just put one foot in front of the other. So I had this, I had to sort of deal with who do I listen to, how much weight do I give each of these edits, kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And I've always been the type of person where, you want me to make this change. Okay, I'll make this change, but I want to understand why.
That would totally be me in that situation, so I definitely sympathize there.
But not in like an antagonistic way, like not in like a defensive way, but like, okay, I get it. So what is the reason why you want this change? I mean, I'm not like, oh, I'm not changing it or anything like that, but it's like, okay, so
You want context.
yeah, I want context. just because I like seeing the big picture. And sometimes the answer was as simple as, well, we're in the middle of writing this season, and some of the stuff that you came up with, we've already written into the season.
Hmm.
You came very close to something that we've already written into the season, so we can't use it in the book because it's already in the season.
It sounds like they should
Yeah,
have just put you on the payroll and have you help with the series.
from your lips to God's ears. And so, but I mean, it's just like I just need to know why. Um, so yeah, so that was an interesting back and forth. But it did prepare me to working with licensors, because when I worked on Charmed, or when I worked on Xena, or anything else like that, I mean, I had to deal with the other licensors. I mean, Dynamite is almost like a conduit between
Yeah, they
the
do a lot.
like Paramount or CBS or whatever. Um, and so it was good to sort of get that practice. But yeah, I mean, after I did Revenge, then I started getting some Dynamite work. Gail Simone brought me in on a big crossover series called Swords of Sorrow, and I worked on that. And then I was approached by DC Comics and Scott Snyder to be part of the first DC Talent Showcase, DC Talent Workshop.
Yeah.
Um, and it was interesting because we were part of the pilot program. So we were actually chosen by DC. We didn't even know it had existed. And then after we went through the program, I was in it with Emma Beebe and Vita Ayala, Chris Sabella, Joel Jones, Matt Rosenberg. I'm trying to think who else. There was like 10 or 12 of us there. Henna Khan was in there too. And what happened was, after we went through the program, they basically said, okay, anybody who wants to be part of the program now has to apply. So people were coming to me and being like, oh, how'd you get in? How'd you get in? I'm like, they literally called me on the way home from work one day. And
Wow.
it was like, and I didn't say that, to be like, well, huh. I was like, no, that was really the truth.
You
They
just got the
called.
lucky chance of a
Yeah,
lifetime.
exactly. Like I got a phone call on the train on the way home from work one day. Um, so I mean, and it was a good 13, 14 weeks. Um, every week, and we had, it was a 2.5 hour class, and we had tons of homework. And I won't say it was a graduate level class, because I never went to graduate school, so I don't really have that comparison. But I mean, it
Mm.
was it was like a college level class in the sense of, like, workload and everything. um so it was a hell of a lot of work. But an experience that I definitely, has helped a good deal. Obviously got was able to get more contacts from it.
Of
I got to
course,
work
yeah.
with Sunny Liu on an 8-page Hawkgirl story, and I love Hawkgirl. I mean, so that was dream come true. Um, there's apparently a big cabal of Hawkgirl fans in
Yes, there
Brazil and
is.
South
There
America
really is.
that every once in a while will start tagging me in tweets about me writing a Hawkgirl series, and I'm like, DC has my number. Like,
Right? Yeah.
they've got my number. Like, they
I
could
remember
just
when the
pick me
big
up,
like
pick up the call.
80th or 75th anniversary for
Yes.
Hawkman came around. They were like, "Yo, let's just tag Hawkgirl onto it." I'm like, "No, no, no, no! You gotta do her justice because
Well,
she's been running for so
she didn't
long."
get an 80th. She didn't 80th was last year. She didn't get an 80th anniversary like everybody else.
Yeah,
Green Lantern got theirs. Wonder Woman got theirs. Batman,
she
Superman.
deserved it.
I know Shire deserved it, but hey, what can you do? I mean, I've got two beautiful pages from Sunny that I have framed in my studio. So, whenever I get down, I just say, you know what? There's a bucket list right there.
Right. And I remember when Snyder brought her back into canon during Metal, and I was just on top of the moon because he just went on Twitter and was just like, "What team do you guys want?" And everyone can as a group just said, "We want the animated series, the Dwayne McDuffie team." And he was like, "All right, cool. I'm gonna push Kendra back into canon. We're gonna bring her back and start doing right by her." And even now they just sort of kept her on with Bendis now, and I'm so happy to see her back because she deserves to be a part of this pantheon.
Yeah, and it's, I really enjoyed um Shayera Hall uh from the Justice League cartoon show, and I really enjoyed seeing the way she was on her own. Like she didn't need Carter, she didn't need the Thanagarians.
Yes.
She was her own person, and I thought that that was really great and that was very empowering. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with that story. Because even though they only published 8 pages, I mean, I had written 3 issues of a 5 issue series were
Oh
already
wow.
completely written. Yeah. Um, so I had a plan for it. I really did, and the hope was that we would be able to get, to sort of have that come to fruition. Um, Unfortunately, that didn't happen, but life
It's no
happens.
big deal. Like they have your number. We can get back to it.
Yeah, exactly. I'll happily pick it up anytime.
Excellent. So, the metaphor you used earlier really stuck with me. The whole like different mountains and whatnot, and the mountains that I see among the comic book landscape, like where DC's one mountain, Marvel's here, Image, Dynamite, what have you. It seems like you find yourself more comfortable in the valley. You seem like you're more in your comfort zone with your own toolbox, your own toy box, and one thing that I've talked to with a couple of different indie creators is the freedom you have to tell new and inventive stories. And I want before we dig into the book itself, what is it like with with Comixology originals or different stories that you've done where you get to have your own free reign to do things like that?
It's a good and it's a bad, to be honest. What Orson Welles once said, the enemy of art is the absence of limitation,
Yeah.
So when you're working on licensed work, yes, you're working with somebody else's toys, but you already have parameters that are already in place for you. So part of the work for you has already been done. You know, um, Even if you're taking these characters outside of their comfort zone, like we talked briefly about like Daughters of the Dragon in Space kind of thing.
Hmm.
um, Even taking those characters outside of their comfort zone by putting them in this new environment, um, we still know Colleen, we still know Misty, and we still know Beta Ray and whomever they would be interacting with. Those characters already have their personality, so you don't have to change that. So that part of that work is already done for you.
Hmm.
When you're working on creator owned work and you are creating something 100% yours, there's a lot that goes into it, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. And I used to joke about how I only wanted to write crime fiction that took place in the real world because I didn't want to have to deal with world building. Um, and that became old pretty quickly, and I like challenges, so I ended up doing more and more things. And Forgotten Home, which I had to create an entire parallel universe that has its own rules. I created a this whole hierarchy society and everything, and it took a on and off working on and off for like a good 3 years. you know so I mean, I love working in creator owned simply because no one can tell me what's right or wrong, or nobody can tell me what a character will or won't do because they're coming from my head. At the
Hmm.
same time, everything is on. I mean, the artist obviously is interpreting the scripts, but coming up with a lot of these ideas and building this world and everything, it's pretty much all on me. So the pressure is pretty high there. um Forgotten Home is probably one of the most ambitious pieces that I did, because even with M3 or 12 Devils Dancing, they were both crime thrillers that I did. 12 Devils is closer to more horror. It's got more body horror, and it's more of an adult story because it has, it has some nudity in it and things like that. Whereas M3, I would say, is more like PG-13. I would say 12
Mhm.
Devils is definitely R. Um, Even in those realms, dealing with characters and stuff like that, I mean, that still took place. Gravity still existed. You drop a pen, it's going to fall to the floor, kind of thing. So, the characters and the circumstances that they were in were created, but the world that they lived in, I didn't have to create. I literally look out my window and there it is.
Versus with
Where
Forgotten Home, it's like you have to like take over and create everything from scratch.
First of all, I've never been to Montana in my entire life. That's the first thing. And the entire first issue of Forgotten Home takes place in Montana. I've never been to Montana. I'm the first person to admit that. Never traveled to Montana in my life.
Interesting.
Same thing with 12 Devils Dancing. Never went to Las Vegas. Ever.
Did you
Never
like?
been
Is it
never
on
been to
like the bucket
Albuquerque.
list?
No, it's not even something on my bucket list. But I had to delve and research. I would literally scour Google Earth for all kinds of things. Um, and I'm very reference heavy in my scripts, not as an edict for my artists, but more as an inspiration. Also because I know that they do a lot of heavy lifting.
Mhm.
So if I can give them something to at least spark them, as opposed to them sort of having to start from scratch all the time, it helps. But yeah, I mean, Forgotten Home, I had to create the idea of this entire world and the rules by which the world, the rules of this magical world, and how there were some people who would have magic their entire lives, the royal family, and then other sort of lay people would have magic from the ages of like 6 or 7 until about 17, 18. But after that, they're just regular people. They're not magical anymore. And as a character dealing with that, and then you have the character of Trodaire, who um, is a Hamel, who is basically, which is I learned how to pronounce it correctly. I was pronouncing it Camille because it's spelled with a K,
Mhm.
but it's actually pronounced Hamel, I believe, and it
Okay.
means inert in Arabic. And he never had magic. So even when he was a child, when everybody else had magic, he never had magic. So how does that like weigh on him? As a person, as a character, and how does it weigh on the queen and everybody? I mean, so starting from scratch is it's a bitch. It's really, it's incredibly rewarding. It really is. But sometimes when you're in the thick of it, you're like, God, what have I gotten myself into?
Like you
Um,
sort of put yourself in the middle of this giant canvas and don't
yeah,
really know how to get out of it.
yeah. Well, there, you always have to find a way to paint yourself out of the corner. You always have to find a way to get it's like when you paint yourself in a corner is when you turn into Spider-Man. It's you got to
Yeah.
crawl up the walls, but you got to find a plausible way of doing that. So yeah, it's. But we were nominated for 5 Ringo Awards last
Yeah, that was I saw
year.
that and I was like,
So
wow. And like for those who haven't really like looked at, because I know comicsology originals, like people find them, but I know not every comic shop goer finds it. So like, can you give people an elevator pitch for it? That way, like I can link it and like get more people to look at it.
okay, so the elevator pitch for Forgotten Home is a sheriff's deputy in Montana starts investigating child abductions and really gets involved when her own teenage daughter and teenage daughter's best friend are kidnapped, are part of this abductions. When she follows the clues, she finds out that uh, her old home, then you learn that she's basically a refugee princess from a magical land called Janata, and people from her home world are stealing children from Earth. So there's
That
like
sounds cool.
magical child army, um, refugee princess who doesn't want to take the throne, evil queen. Like when you read the first issue, you're like, oh, it's a cop, and they're, you know, trying to track down all these children, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, her hands are glowing. Like, what is going
You
on
like
here?
lure them into a false sense of security, and then you just jump in and make everything nuts, and I love that.
Yeah. So I mean, the reason why I say it was a bit of an undertaking was because the story arc is actually 8 issues for the full story arc. And when we took it to a couple of publishers, a lot of publishers said, "We love it. We want it to be 5 issues." And I could have made it 5 issues. I could have written it as 5 issues. I don't think it would have been as rich of story, and I
Mm-hmm.
and I wouldn't have been able to have spent enough time with the characters as I wanted to. So when we went to Comixology Originals, we got the same thing as everybody else of, we'd really like it to be 5 issues. And I said, okay, I understand that. But, and I understand why, because, it's a nice, easy package for a trade paperback. Like, I
Yeah.
get the reasoning behind it. But let me just plead my case. We have these very complex characters. We're not just dealing with magic and this and that and the next thing. We're dealing with loss. We're dealing with grief. We're dealing with loss of loved ones. We're dealing with loss of identity. We're dealing with finding your identity and things like that. And this idea of the main character Lorraine, who's the refugee princess, she left what you would have thought would have been everything, like magic, riches, literally royalty. She walked out on all of that.
But she wanted simplicity.
She wanted simplicity. Because all of that means expectations.
Mm.
She was her from the day she was born. She was destined to lead the army in war. She didn't want to do that. But the irony of it is that she flees to our land. She flees to Earth from her world. And she's lost here. And the only thing that she knows how to do is be a soldier. So she joins our army.
Wow.
So there's this one scene with her daughter, because there's a lot of resentment between her and her daughter. And then we need to talk about the book that I'm actually hawking in a second.
Oh yeah, no. Like, I was going to translate. So, like, loss and grief. Let's move over here. I wanted to let you finish your
Exactly.
thought.
But so there's actually a back and forth between her daughter, who resents Lorraine. Joanna resents Lorraine because when Joanna goes back to Janata, which is the home world, she says, I always felt like a freak, but here I feel whole. Here I feel like I'm home, and you kept this from me. So there's this resentment. And when Lorraine says, like, I didn't want to be a soldier, and she says, well, but that's exactly what you were. So you ran away to escape something,
But you
and
just
all
did
you did,
anyway.
and you did it aneway. Like, it doesn't matter whether you're wearing Janatan armor or you're wearing US Army armor. It's the same thing. You made the same mistake, mom. And it comes into this whole thing about like this fallacy of when we're teenagers and when we're children, we think that our parents are infallible. And our parents are not infallible. Our parents are absolute human beings. But at that age, you can't see that.
Mm-hmm.
It's all you see is, well, they're telling me what to do, and I think they're wrong, but I can't prove it because they're mom and dad, and mom and dad know everything. You
Exactly.
know. So there's a lot of resentment and everything. I'm very proud of the book. I'm incredibly proud of the team.
Honestly, Mary was like telling me when I told her that we were doing this interview. She's like, "You need to get her to talk about this book." I'm like, I had never heard of this. I had done some other Comixology originals like with Joe Glass and whatnot, but then this one just fled under my radar, and now I have to buy this because this sounds amazing.
Yeah. So if you go, there is a Bitly link, bit.ly / forgotten home.
Mm-hmm.
It'll take you directly to the Comixology.
I have it pulled up right here. I'm going to link it in the description because I definitely am going to pick this up tonight because I need something new to read. So thank you for that. So
You're very welcome.
in terms of loss and grief, let's translate to
Yeah.
what you are here to talk about. The thing
Hawking my wares, exactly.
exactly. Like I will. Like I'm definitely going to premiere this tomorrow when the Kickstarter goes live. But Deadliest Bouquet, this like story, I remember when your editor sent me the summary of this, and I was like, oh, this is like that really good story that could go really dark really fast, and I really want to see where this goes. Cause like
Yeah.
the idea of this like assassin type person who's hunted down Nazis and then leaving her daughters to like not really worry about that until it bites her in the ass, it leaves a lot of room to do some really cool things.
Yeah, so the log line for this story is in 1998, three estranged sisters trained by their Nazi hunting mother come together to solve their mother's murder and try not to kill each other in the process.
I gotta
Uh,
start with like what made you want to tell this kind of story?
so this is another story that's been kicking around in my head for a while. And the stories that you're going to see me coming out with over the next, I would say, 18 months to 2 years are a lot of stories that have been around for a good 3 to 5 years, and I've just been slowly developing them.
Okay.
And so I was on the phone with Liana Kangas, who's a creator and artist, and I just sort of blurted out this idea of like, you know, assassins and like wouldn't it be kind of cool to do a story in the 90s and like maybe with like these like three girls that are trained by their mom to be kind of like Black Widow kind of esque characters, but their mom dies and they're sort of all trying to figure out what happened. Like, is it somebody from mom's past? Is it a random accident? The family runs a flower shop, and
Mm-hmm.
this all happens around Valentine's Day. And one of the theories that the cops are saying is like, wow, Valentine's Day, flower shops got a lot of money around Valentine's Day. Maybe this was robbery gone wrong. Or was it a robbery gone wrong? Or was it somebody who Jasmine had, you know, done an assassination on? Is it revenge killing for an assassination? Is it this local biker gang that's been hitting up a bunch of the shops on the main drag for extortion money? Like there's all these little, everybody has a theory, and basically you've got these three sisters who are dealing with not only the death of their mother, but they're also dealing with their relationship to their mom and their relationship to each other. And they had a very complex relationship with their mom. Their mom trained them to learn to kill people, and you know, each one of them dealt with that in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So the oldest sister, Rose, felt like, okay, this is a responsibility that I'm taking on, and I have to be the leader. I'm the oldest. I have to be the leader. I have to keep my two younger sisters in line. The middle sister, Poppy, was very reluctant about all of this. She would train exactly how her mom taught her to train, but she didn't like it. This wasn't something that she reveled in. This isn't something she didn't look at it as like, oh, look at this cool new skill. It was, why can't I talk to my friends about this stuff? You know, and there's family secrets and all this other stuff. And Poppy always felt really resentful of that. And then Violet is just a pure sociopath. Violet revels in the training and thinks that this is like the coolest stuff ever. But I mean, what we end up seeing is we end up seeing a different side to all of them. So, Poppy ends up leaving and getting married and having her own family and moving to the other side of the country, moves to California. The story takes place in Jersey, and moves to California and keeps her mom and her sisters at arm's length. So her husband knows that she came from a dysfunctional family. He has absolutely no idea the depths to which this goes.
Ooh, that's gonna be fun.
Um, and she, now that she's back home, she's got to play keep away. So not only does she have to be an integral part of figuring out what happened to her mom, uh, and be there for her sisters. But on top of this, she's got, her husband calling all the time and bringing the kids over. And, she's pushing them away in her mind to protect them. But at the same time, as the husband, you got to kind of wonder. And the kids are always like, well, why isn't mommy here?
Yeah.
Why are we staying in a hotel when mommy's cross town kind of thing?
I'm noticing so many parallels to different like media sources, but I love how this could either go just very straightforward, or we could dive into Nazi conspiracy theories. And I'm like, I want to hope that you're gonna give me a little bit of that with this.
Well, this is the thing. So originally, this was supposed to be three story arcs.
Okay.
So originally, it was supposed to be the three sisters. It was supposed to start with their grandparents, Dahlia and Leif, and they were part of the French Resistance in World War II. And Dahlia and Leif, after the war ended, then they created a group with some French resistance fighters that were then going to travel the world and find any Nazis um, that escaped Germany. So they have Jasmine and Chris, and they train Jasmine and Chris along with these rest of these sort of ex French resistance fighters. So the first arc took place in World War II and sort of led up to the end of the war and having Jasmine and Chris and starting Jasmine and Chris's training. The second arc was going to be Jasmine and Chris going on missions together, and basically taking all the skills that their parents taught them and doing all this stuff, and then Chris dying and Jasmine taking that to heart and basically running away. And that was going to be, runs to America and meets this guy and gets married. And that was going to be sort of the end of the second arc. And then the third arc was going to be what this is really, which is, Jasmine's married. She has these three daughters. There's a tragedy that happens. And Jasmine decides that it's time that her children, her daughters, learn as she learned.
So what made you not do the previous two arcs and sort of jump to like the end of the third arc?
Basically, I had started and stopped this story multiple times, and it wasn't really until I brought James Emmett in, the editor, that I really found the through line, because every time I tried to start the story, I would go too far down the path, and it was getting too long. It was I was sort of losing the real core of the plot.
Okay.
And so what I did was, when I brought James in, and James and I had worked together before, I brought him in and I said, look, I have half written scripts and I've tackled it from different angles. I've tackled each arc. There was a whole subplot that I had with the next door neighbor of the girls growing up was a Holocaust survivor who knew Jasmine from who knew Jasmine's parents rather from World War II. And so there was like a weird like sort of life debt that was there. It was an interesting thread, but it was getting too far off the rails. Now, mind you, everything that I still have written out. It's just not going to make it in the final cut kind of thing. And if the Kickstarter does really well, then maybe I'll be able to have the funds to say, okay, you know what, we are going to do these other arcs.
Yes.
So pledge to that Kickstarter.
Yeah, definitely.
So I gave James, all the different sort of half written scripts, and I said, I've tackled it from multiple different angles, and I keep getting in the weeds. So he took everything and he read everything and he said, okay, take this from this and that from that and that from the next thing. And he said, look, what you need to do is you need to focus on one story. And I think the strongest of these stories that you have is the story of these three sisters dealing with the loss of their mom. Now, through flashbacks, you then touch on World War II, Jasmine training the girls and all that other stuff. And you get that information in there.
Sort of tease people for what could be later on.
Well, not only that, but gives it more context and gives the story a little more richness, but you don't go down the rabbit hole. Like, you're not going page upon page upon page of flashbacks. You're doing 2 panels here, 1 panel there, kind of thing, to give more context, to anchor the past, these women's pasts a little more, but not going crazy. So yes, we will see Dahlia killing Nazis, and we will see Jasmine and Chris kicking ass. Um, but we're not going to go crazy down the rabbit hole with that, because we want to focus on these three women. And like I said, if the Kickstarter does really well and there's an interest in it, I will happily go back and work on the other two arcs. I really would. Because now I think that this one is fleshed out. I'll have an easier time of knowing where to go with the other two. I think
Hmm.
that's the one thing with, that's one of the things with, creating stuff on your own, is sometimes there's so many possibilities that it's really hard to focus. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like you have this long hallway and you have all these extra doors that you're
Yeah.
sort of creaking open for a hot second and then just leaving there. That way you can come back later if you have the opportunity.
Yeah, and I absolutely would love to come back to this. And I really did like the idea of the next door neighbor who was the Holocaust survivor. And I had this whole scene where we didn't talk about her being a Holocaust survivor, but the way it was framed was Jasmine was pouring tea, and you see Jasmine's tattoo, which is the Cross of Lorraine, which was a symbol of the French resistance. And you see her tattoo as she's pouring the tea. And when
Mm.
the neighbor reaches for the cup, you see her numbers on her forearm.
Oh.
So we didn't say the words, but just by those very subtle things. And then the neighbor starts saying, I remember your mother. You look just like her. Like, you have your mother's eyes, and you have your father's, you have your father's smile, you have your mother's eyes. But it wasn't this overt, oh, by the way, your parents helped liberate me from a concentration camp.
You know,
No.
like you use those subtle hints to carry it on, but leave it there.
Yeah. So that was this whole sort of back and forth between the two of them over this very sort of quiet pot of tea, and
Okay.
sort of reminiscing and stuff. And that was a scene that I really, really liked. But in the context of what we're doing now, it wouldn't fit. But if there's a way, because this older woman wouldn't be alive now with the
Uh-huh.
daughters, but if there's a way that we can go back, and I keep saying if the Kickstarter funds, but I mean the truth of the matter is that it does basically come down to like what we can afford to, financially afford to create.
Of course.
So so I would love it if this Kickstarter funded really well. Then I can turn around and say, all right, let's, even if it's a one shot, let's do that, and let's maybe add it to the graphic
It could be
novel.
a stretch goal.
Exactly. So that's something that that we're sort of talking about. But this is a graphic novel. Originally it was going to be a 5 issue series, but then we decided when we did the Kickstarter that it was going to be 5 chapters. So it's 120 pages,
Okay.
um, of story, and you get the entire story in it. And even if I, God forbid, I never get to go back to those other story arcs, you'll still be able to get a satisfying murder mystery. That's sort of, I've been describing it as like Knives Out a bit.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Knives Out, but they're not that rich. Like they're just like working class flower shop owner. But yeah, it's definitely got like a Knives Out vibe of, who done it, but also, with this sort of complex past.
See, I'm kind of torn because I want it to be two different things. I want it to be Knives Out, but I also want it to be like Amazon's The Hunt, where you still see that little bit of Nazi hunting in there while you see like trying to figure out what happened to Jasmine. So
All
I'm
right. Well, I
torn.
will tell you this. There is a scene where you will see a Nazi officer get stabbed pretty damn hard.
Yes, I don't know why. It's just ever since because I love history. It's one of my favorite things that I enjoy looking back at. Because in school it was always English and history, never math and science. And just the conspiracy theories and the the crazy stories you hear from that era of how military advanced in like so crazy ways, different things that happened, and you could like have so many ways of telling that in a story that you can make the series be even longer if you wanted to.
Well, I genuinely would have loved to have. a really long series. At one point, I was in talks with a publisher about doing a longer series, but unfortunately, COVID
Yeah.
put the kibosh on that. And again, I mean, so many people got, I mean, COVID obviously took lives and did terrible things and it's still going on.
Hmm.
Um, and by no means am I saying, oh, I lost out on a publishing thing. That's not the worst of it at all. And I don't want anybody to think that I'm thinking that is. I mean, that's a very privileged thing to say. Um, but that was one of the circumstances that happened.
Hmm.
Um, I genuinely would like to get back to the story, and I genuinely would like to do a lot. Like the whole thing about Dahlia and Leif. The reason why Dahlia got involved in the French Resistance was because her parents. She was living in Paris at the time. Her mother was Parisian, her father was Algerian, and they owned a small restaurant, just a little cafe.
Oh,
And in 1941 was when the Germans occupied Paris.
yeah.
And there was an art. Now, there's this whole thing about, the Germans first came in and at first nothing really changed. And then all of a sudden everything changed. It's almost like you woke up one day and everything changed. And I was reading some historical accounts for my research. And so, in the context of the story, Dahlia's in the shop, in the cafe with her family, with her parents, and she's, working the cafe like you would do. If your parents owned a restaurant, you would work in it.
Hmm.
And two German soldiers get into an argument, and her father gets involved to try to be like, no, 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 it's okay, try and calm things down. And it gets out of hand, and her father and mother are killed.
Oh.
Now, in the cafe at that same time, as Dahlia's watching her parents be killed, there's a young woman named Georgette. And Georgette is a member of the French Resistance. But at the time, the French Resistance was not calling themselves La Resistance. They were still sort of these little pockets. And it wasn't until later in September of 1941 that they actually became like a consolidated
Right.
group, as opposed to these like little bits, 5 people on this block, 12 people 5 miles away kind of thing. So Dahlia tries to attack the soldier, and Georgette grabs her and says, and sort of pulls her to the side and says, come with me and I'll teach you how to get revenge. And Georgette brings her into the resistance and says, when she's ready, we're this obviously she's an orphan now. We need to take care of her, but when she's ready, I think she'll be an asset. And Leif was this young Swedish man who grew up on a farm in the United States, who came to the States when he was very, very young, grew up on a farm, and had an accident where one of his hands had been crushed. So he could not join the military in the United States, but he felt like he had to do something. So he abandoned his family, abandoned his farm, and jumped on a freighter and went to Europe, and ends up sort of, in his own sort of espionage kind of way, gets into the French Resistance. And then Leif and Dahlia meet. They fall in love. They become part of the resistance. They're actively part of it. And then when the war's over, they're the ones who say, the war might be over, but our duty is not.
Mm.
And then they bring Georgette and some of the other members of the French Resistance that were with them, and they sort of create this sort of new group. I didn't come up with a name yet, but they sort of create this new group and say, we're going to travel, we're going to find the ones who got away, kind of thing. And they get married, and while they're sort of traveling from place to place, they end up having the twins, Jasmine and Chris. And they're still actively doing the things that they're doing, and Jasmine and Chris are growing up in this multicultural, multilingual environment, being, at a young age, being raised, sort of like it takes a village kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, Georgette and some of these other people, as well as their parents, are sort of raising them and teaching them kind of things. And then once Jasmine and Chris are old enough to start going on missions on their own, they do. And then unfortunately, in one of the missions, Chris is killed. And at the time, we talk about how Jasmine was sort of getting disillusioned
Mm-hmm.
with it. And then when Chris dies, she, that's it. So she runs away from home. She's 17 years old. She runs away from home. She gets to America, and once she's in America, she's in New York, and she's at the Bronx Botanical Gardens, and she's looking at the flowers, and this young man named Lionel Hawthorne approaches her, because she's this, beautiful, exotic-looking woman. He approaches her. They start talking. He loves flowers and wants to start a flower shop. They end up falling in love, getting married, moving to New Jersey, and opening this flower shop. And then they have these three daughters, Rose, Poppy, and Violet. And then we learn another tragedy that happens. And once that happens, Jasmine says, I need my girls to be trained. I need my girls to know how to defend themselves. And that's what starts this story arc. So it's like each sort of like it comes full circle, but then it starts again,
Mm-hmm.
almost like a coil of a spring.
What I like that I've
Right?
noticed is that it's like sort of the parallel from Forgotten Home is you kind of make the mother of both stories sort of still keep her history with her.
Yeah.
Like it's gonna catch up to you at some point, whether you
You
like it or
can't,
not.
yeah, you can't escape your past, and you can't escape, like, I'm not going to say that everything is fated and that, this, that, and the next thing, but there's a lot of stuff you can't run away from all of it. And that's actually something that I also bring up with Poppy,
Mm-hmm.
because, Poppy ran away from home, and yet with Jasmine's death, she's now back in the thick of it. And it's actually something that Rose says to her, you can't run away from your problems. And Poppy responds, she says, is this about mom or is this about Derek? And Rose says it's about both. So I mean, your past is gonna catch up with you.
Yeah.
um and that's something that I think, you can make amends as best as you can, or you can just try and live your life better. But if you did something really rotten in your past, someday it's gonna, catch up to you. And whether that's Jasmine or, Poppy, or, anybody. Same thing with Lorraine in Forgotten Home.
Mm-hmm.
She thought that she could escape her past, and it came back to bite her in the ass, kind of thing.
Right.
Um, and I write a lot about family because as a storyteller, you want your audience to connect to your characters and to connect to the story. And the easiest way to do that is to have characters that are relatable. So if you're telling a story about family, whether it's found family, family by blood or by bond, either way, that's something that pretty much everybody
It
can.
gives people an entry point.
Yeah, because everybody has somebody, whether it's a sibling, a parent, an uncle, a grandparent, a best friend, like a foster family or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has that and has felt that type of relationship. And whether or not they've lost it or they still have it, you can still see that. And that's an easy way for people to link into the characters. Um, and that's why, because everybody's like, why do you always write about family? I'm like, because that's what everybody can relate to.
Like it's not even that it's easy, it's more so you found the way to get at people where it hurts. You find a way
Yeah.
to get them into the story whether they like it or not.
Yeah. And the biggest insult, because somebody said, well, what if somebody doesn't like your story? So, well, do they not like it, or they just think meh? Because the biggest insult could just be like meh, whatever. It didn't
Exactly.
do anything to me. If somebody vehemently hates my story, then I still did my job. Because if
Mm.
somebody loves it, then I did my job, because it created an emotional response. If somebody hates it, then I still did my job because it created an emotional response. And art needs to have some type of an emotional response. And if
Excellent.
and if you just sort of shrug at it, then you didn't touch that person. But if
Right.
if they feel something like, God, this is the worst thing I ever read.
Like how dare you make me feel like this?
Exactly. Then you know what? Then I still did my job, and the team still did their job because they made you feel something. Even if it was vile and you hated it, it still made you feel something. Um, and I take that as just as much of a compliment as somebody being like, this was amazing, I loved this.
Hmm.
But again, somebody just is like, yeah, it didn't really do anything for me. Then I'm like, all right, then it's not the story for you.
All right.
you know so
But
That's my piece.
and it was an amazing piece. You like spoke with the passion that like when you're pitching this kind of thing to people, and like you even said earlier, you've been doing this all day. No, you still have that like veracity, that care that like your story needs to pitch it to people.
I write and I create not because I want to, but because I have to. Like writing for me is literally a compulsion. It is an addiction. And if I go more than say 2 days without doing any type of creative writing, I start to lose my mind because if I feel like a tea kettle that doesn't have the ability to whistle. Like I feel like I'm going to explode. Um, and for me, it's a compulsion. I mean, whether that's emotionally healthy or not, I don't know.
It sounds
Um,
pretty healthy because you're always creating new stories for people.
well, that's the thing is, but it's really it is who I am. It's just part of what I am. It's part of my DNA. So I mean, like, yeah, I'll talk about how tired I am of being on the 75th podcast this hour, but at the same time, I'll still talk about it with passion because I mean, I'm passionate about it. I mean, it's not an easy career, so you either have to be crazy or crazy in love with it. And I think I'm a little bit of both.
I mean, honestly, if you don't love what you're doing, what's the point? Like
Exactly.
it's a cliche, but like if you're just crazy and hungry for the money, then what's the point? If you're in it, like loving what you're doing, loving creating content, that's the true like love of it.
Let me tell you something interesting about comics.
Go
If
for
you're
it.
in comics for money, then there are a lot easier ways of making money than being in comics. That is the brass tacks of it.
Okay.
Be an accountant, uh be a lawyer, be there are so many easier ways in this world to make money than creating comics.
Like you're actually like you're not even doing it for the wealth or anything. You're doing it because you care. It's like I was talking to my tattoo artist the other day, and she was saying there's so many people who are in this just for the money rather than the art. And it's like, yeah, no, you need to care about what you're doing. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, well, that's the thing is like, you know, I would I love to see a Forgotten Home anime? Absolutely. Would I love to see
Ooh,
yeah, I know.
that
I
sounds
read,
awesome.
would I love to see a Deadliest Bouquet Netflix series?
Yes.
Absolutely. If it never happens, fine, it never happens. I mean, M3 in the past 12 years, M3's been optioned 3 times. Nothing ever came of it, but it has been optioned multiple times. Um, if anything happens, great. I would love to be able to fix the fence, or get new windows for my house.
Hey, like if that ever happens, then by all means do
you
so.
know, like that's the funny. Everybody's like, I'm going to buy a new house. No, I just want to fix my fence, and I want to get new windows because there's a window that's when it's cold out, I can definitely feel the breeze. Like that's
Understandable, yeah.
I'm pretty realistic when it comes to that, or maybe a new dishwasher.
Okay.
Um, but I mean, I don't look at any of this as, getting into this to be rich and famous. The amount of times that I have a conversation with my mother, and if I'm disappointed or I'm frustrated about something going on in the industry, she'll literally say to me, I wish there was something that you loved more than this. She will. I wanted to go into medicine. I couldn't hack the grades. I had a huge passion for medicine. I went to EMT school. I thought about doing medicine as a career.
Mhm.
I couldn't hack the grades, but and that is a passion of mine. And I, if I didn't have such a bad shoulder, I'd probably go back to EMT school. But this is something that I have even more passion for, and it's something that I have to do. And like I said, and my mom always says it, I wish there's something you loved more, because as much as comics will break your heart, as Jack Kirby said, comics are the writing is the only thing that fulfills me.
Dang. You
So
hit me in my
it's
heart because I love Jack Kirby. Like, dang.
but it's true. I mean, Kirby was the one who said comics will break your heart, kid.
Yeah.
um and they will. But for every time that comics break, okay, so the in CERN, what is it called, the Large Hadron Collider?
Hmm.
You know, when the atoms hit each other and they cancel each other out,
Yeah.
and they talk about how the only way that the universe could be created is if one time it didn't cancel itself out.
Yeah.
So making comics, they're going to break your heart and they're going to put your heart back together. And it's maybe it's a zero sum game, but every once in a while you get an extra beat of your heart before it gets broken again. And that's what you live for.
Do you ever see yourself getting out of it?
Out of the business?
Yeah.
Um, I would see myself, I don't know if I would continue to write comics specifically.
Mm-hmm.
I might look into writing novels, or I might look into writing television or film, or, you know, hey, if anything gets optioned and, you know, I'm lucky enough to be, you know, brought on to, you know, start writing that, great. Um, the place that I'm at, you know, I'm going to be 44 years old next month. I don't want to start like a whole different career.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'm going to be writing.
Like either way, you'll still have a pen in your hand.
Oh God, yeah.
Okay.
I'll be writing. You know, they'll be literally removing the pen from my dead grip.
Nice.
The NRA says something about, you know, take the gun out of my cold dead hand or whatever. Well, take the pen out of my cold dead hand. You
Okay.
know, and then whatever it is that I wrote, make sure that you get that made. Like there's literally a clause in my will to my husband saying, you know where the notebooks are, produce everything that you can.
Well, all right. We will make sure that we continue to support your content. Like this is sort of my wrap up, and then we'll have like the after podcast discussion before I let you go. But it's like, thank you for coming on here. Obviously, you probably have done this all day, but you still wanted to come on here and talk to us here at Panel to Panel, and that means a lot. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time, because as much as I take the time to talk about it, you all take the time to, you know, give me airtime, and, you know, I mean, it's time out of your life too. So I thank you. And I heard the puppy in the back being like, "Hey."
Yeah, I was like trying like to not like, yeah, that was a thing.
It's no, it's look, man, you have a life, you have a pup, you've got stuff to do. Like it is 5 seconds before I logged on to Skype, I was feeding the cat. So, you know, it's it's you please, you have your own life to live. It does not have to revolve around me blathering on for an hour about, you know, makeup stories.
See, but the thing about it is, and like this will be a good wrap up, is like it's so sort of like our stories are sort of similar. Where I wanted nothing more when I was in college to be like my mother and be in criminal justice, but like when I was younger, she would always tell me to get out of Batman land and start and put down the comics and the like the Yu-Gi-Oh cards and what have you. And I left comics behind for a good like 3 years, but except for everything but wikis. Like I would still keep up with the news, but like never pick up a book. And then I finally got back into it when I went to college, and I found my true love again. I found communication because being on a mic or being in front of a computer and writing about the stuff that I love matters. And growing up, it was always the struggle of seeing like the whole comic shop being filled with nothing but white people, and I'm the one person reading like Falcon or Black Lightning in the corner, and it sucked. So it's like now that I'm not alone in the market, it shows that I can be an influence, whether how big or small. So I will continue to do this even if the dog's barking in the background.
But see, that's the thing, is like we were talking about, like it's a compulsion. It's something you feel like you have to do. Well, there you go. That is your thing that you have to do. And I think about all the people in the world that don't find that, and aside from not finding it, don't know or have the support of their friends and loved ones to be able to pursue it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, in that case, we're incredibly lucky that not only did we find it, but that we were able to say, I'm going to do that.
Most definitely.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that was deep. You hit me in like in the soul a little bit there. So normally what we do is what is your closing statement for this episode of Panel to Panel?
My closing statement.
Yeah.
Okay.
It can be about the book. It can be like pitching, like because we can always do like the Twitters and whatnot after the fact. But what is the closing statement that you want to leave with people every week? Because we'll say support your local comic book shop. We'll say something funny that we've talked about, like if you watch our previous episodes. But it's like, what do you want to leave people with, until the next time you somehow come back?
I came back to this not too long ago. I had a professor in college who's since passed away, and his name was Clayton Hudnall.
Mm-hmm.
And after I graduated, we had communicated via email for a bit. And at the end of one email, he wrote, "Read books, fall in love, dream a lot." And I thought that that was so beautiful and so poignant. And I think that that's what we all need to do. We all need to read some books, fall in love, and dream.
I love that so much. That is a great place to end. Thank you for having this discussion.
Thank you again. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. And the cat just got up. He slept through the entire thing, and he literally just got up and he's staring at me.
That's perfect.